everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast on the Her Hoop Stats Podcast Network. I'm Crina Mustafa alongside Calvin Wetzel, and we've got a ton to get into today. We're going to give a little shout out at the top of the pod. Then we're going to get into some Las Vegas Aces talk because that is the elephant in the room right now. Then kind of dive into some of the really close games that have happened over the last week or so and maybe talk about why those are happening. And then, of course, we've got the games to watch at the end of the podcast today. Cal, are you ready?
Always ready. The close games have been just like giving me life. I love it. Like it feels like every night, every game is just down to the wire. We're going to talk about that, but that just has me like so hyped for more basketball. And tonight we have a 5-game slate, which will all be done by the time you're listening to this, but so much basketball. So ready for it.
Yeah, it just seems like everything is packed in right now as we continue to go to that playoff rush near the end of the month. I did want to give a special shout out because we have a new mascot in the league, and that is none other than Skyland Lionist for the Chicago Sky. Shout out to these pictures from Chicago PR, and that is your YouTube cue to head over to YouTube to see what Chicago Sky's new mascot looks like. I'll read this little kind of like thing that Sky PR sent us. The lioness was chose to embody strength, feminine power, grace, and the courage to overcome obstacles, qualities that the Chicago Sky consistently showcase. A lioness is a fierce female feline that walks a safari with authority while nurturing the pack and defending against predators. The lioness's resilience and authority are respected and honored. Lions also have a strong connection to the city of Chicago as iconic guardians of the Art Institute of Chicago and strong supporters of the Sky's 2021 championship, where they donned Sky jerseys. So welcome, Sky, the lioness. R.I.P. Sky Guy. I didn't even know that this was like in the works, so it kind of just came out of the blue. Maybe other people knew that it was going to happen. I think this guy like tweeted out a little hint that something was going to happen, but yeah. Other than that, what do you think about the new Sky mascot, Cal?
Yeah, Sky Guy had a great run. It was fun while it lasted. I'm very here for the power and grace and courage and all of those cool things that you just listed. And I love our friend Miles Ehrlich starting right away, wasting no time, getting a little mascot rivalry going on Twitter with Ellie, who is the face of the league when it comes to mascots. I feel like the Liberty mascot, and so we had to have that going. So yeah, all around, I love it.
Yeah. Sky Lioness has some competition, as all the other mascots do, against Ellie, the elephant from the New York Liberty. But yeah, that's a cool little shout out to start off the week. But let's get into our headline of the week, and that is diagnosing the Las Vegas Aces. And we're not basketball doctors, but I kind of phrase it like that because right now it seems like there are a million questions circling the Las Vegas Aces. Just to kind of give you a sense of their last several games. They dropped 2 in a row to the Minnesota Lynx, which are the 2 matchups that we did talk about last week on the podcast, where we both kind of said we thought it might go 1-1, that they might split. We didn't think any of the teams were going to go 2-0 against each other, but the Lynx did do that against the Aces. Then the Aces beat the Sky by 2 points on that Asia layup buzzer beater winner. They lost by 3 to the Dallas Wings most recently, despite Asia scoring 42 points. How do you diagnose the Las Vegas Aces at this moment in time, Cal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot on the defensive end, but I want to talk about the offense first. And I do want to say, like, I think part of when you look at the season long kind of stuff, at not just this last week that you mentioned, is the record is going to be worse this year because the top competition is better. I think the competition around them last year, it was kind of Liberty and Aces and then everyone else. Like, you talk about the Sun, but realistically, like, it was those 2 teams. And now you have a lot of other good teams, 3 through 5, and even like the middle of the league has stepped up. So that's part of it. But obviously, it's a lot more than that. Like you said, like they almost lost to Sky, they lost to the Wings. Like those 2 teams are not part of that championship contender group that has expanded this year. It's a lot deeper. And I think offensively, like I don't view it as what I think a lot of the talk that I see is like Asia Wilson has somehow stepped up her game even more from how good she already was offensively. How has she gotten better and the Aces have still gotten worse? Like that doesn't make any sense. But I view it as kind of like the opposite, or maybe it's like the chicken, the egg or something like that. Like I feel like it works the other way where like the rest of the Aces have kind of dropped off a little bit. And that's why Asia has had to carry this load and why Asia has had to be on pace to set the league scoring record in order to basically keep this team and this offense afloat, because a lot of regression across the board outside of her. Like Kelsey Plum and Jackie Young have both regressed to sort of like human, regular good shooting, 3-point shooting levels, as opposed to like historically good where they were the last couple of years. As a whole, because of that, like the team's 3-point shooting is the worst it's been since 2018, from a percentage standpoint. And when you have that around Asia, like that's obviously a huge key. Point guard is still not the same offensive threat she was, I think, before the injury, which obviously sucks. And she's making plays for other people, but just in terms of her scoring, I think that's the biggest key for them, and that's the biggest thing that they need to unlock if they are going to sort of turn this around and like make another playoff run. Because when you think of the last couple of years and like what has really gotten them over the top, especially 2 years ago, that playoff run, like Chelsea Gray just going and getting a bucket when they need it, like her ISOing, no one being able to stop her, like breaks down, late clock, ISO ball, Chelsea can score on anyone. She can hit anything. And we haven't really seen a lot of that from her this year. We've still seen her, like I said, distributing, but and maybe like hitting some spot ups. But in terms of like just give her the ball, go get a bucket, in terms of ISO, clear out like Chelsea Gray magic, like we haven't seen that as much post injury. And I hope it comes back because it's just incredible to witness as a basketball fan. And obviously that's huge for the Aces. But I think offensively that's a big key to it. Like last year, their offensive rating in late clock situations was 95 points per 100 possession. This year, it's 75, and I think a lot of that drop is because late clock, like Chelsea, that's a big key. So, like the defense has been an issue as well, but I think offensively that's where it's at for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even like circling back to the whole like Asia conversation, I feel like that's also affected the MVP conversation as well, because now it's like, okay, how do you view this award? It comes back to what you were saying, or like, is Asia getting better than she was last year? Or is it because she's had to be because of what's around the team? So it's like, how do you value her with the rest of the team? Whether it's like, is it the most outstanding player? Is it the fact that she is able to pull off these performances and keep the Aces in games and grab a 2-point win over the Chicago Sky on that buzzer beater, because who else is doing it right now? And there was one thing that's kind of funny that started circling from this whole like stretch of games for the Aces. And we know Asia Wilson, her fashion has been impeccable this whole season. Shout out to her stylist. But she showed up at one of the games last week wearing a white t-shirt and sweatpants, no makeup on her face, went bare. And it kind of like stirred up a lot of conversation. They were like, oh my God, like she means business. Like the Aces are going through this rough stretch right now. And Asia pulled up in this very simple outfit with her game face like ready to go. And I think that was the day they got the win over the Sky. I think that was the first time that she wore that. And she's worn that outfit every single time since, to where it's gotten to the point where like other players in the league, which I will bring this up a little bit later, have started to copy her, because we've literally talked about Asia's influence, and now it's as simple as what she's wearing to a game. That's how much her influence kind of stretches over other players in the league, just like the one leg sleeve that she wears in games too. But I thought that was funny. It's like her game face, the MVP face, the we need to get our stuff together face for the Aces right now. So I don't know, maybe Chelsea Gray needs to try the white tee and sweatpants combo. Maybe that'll work too. Who knows? Maybe you'll get some buzzer beater shots in there too. But yeah, do you have any other thoughts on like why the Aces have struggled, and maybe like what they can kind of do now moving forward after just like identifying some of these like rougher patches?
Yeah, I mean, obviously at this point, you're going to be in that 4-5 matchup also, almost certainly. So we've kind of talked about it, the last couple weeks in terms of like the Aces are going to need to be rested and they're going to need to be fresh, and especially Chelsea Gray. I think that again, the key is her scoring, and you need to use the end of the regular season here to get her right and get as close to being back to where you were with Chelsea Gray as you can realistically. And obviously, like you do want to get up to that 4 seed to host rather than the 5 seed. Like the seeding still does matter where they're at, but it's not like at as big of a deal. So I think that's like the biggest key to them, and then just kind of like figuring out the defense too. I think which we'll talk about in our games to watch at the end too. they've really struggled, I think, with in particular defensively with teams that put 4 or 5 shooters on the court. And whatever reason, I mean, like Alicia Clark is obviously like probably not the same defender she was in her prime. Tip Hayes when she was on the court. Like they do have some older players, but when you look at like how they've played against the Lynx, how they've played against the Mercury, like teams like that who are just trying to spread you out, space the floor, like those teams have lit them up pretty good. And like the other day, the Wings now with Satu back, out around McCowan are often having 4 shooters on the court at that point. Satu got a lot of good looks from the perimeter against them as well. So I think that like is the other thing they kind of need to focus on and really shore up coming into the playoffs is like if you run into a team like that, like you are you are going to have to guard the arc everywhere, and it's different. I think they've had like a little bit more success against teams like the Sun maybe who don't have that same spacing in the front court. But if you want to win a third championship, you're going to gonna have to get through some of those teams that space you out. So that's what I would be looking at for them.
Yeah, and we are still not counting them out. Don't you guys
Nope,
worry about that one.
not at all, not at
They
all. I
will
think they can absolutely figure it out.
they will absolutely figure it out. They still got a couple of weeks here until the playoffs hit. Just yeah, I guess just over. Actually, I can't do math. Don't ask me to do math at the date, but we're getting there. We're getting there. But yeah, those are the Las Vegas Aces. They've had a couple of close games recently. In addition to all the other close games that have been happening recently. So let's get into those. We'll start with August 23rd and kind of work with every single day because there have been, like I said, close games. On that day, the Mercury beat the Dream 82-80, and the Sun beat the Sky 82-80. Or was that the right score? Did I write the same thing for both? Anyway, all I know is they were both 2-point games. That's all that matters. Let's start with the fact of like, why do you think there's been so many close games in the second half of the season so far?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think those were both right. By the way, I'm not
Yeah,
positive, but
that's
I
kind of
think
like
it
that's kind of
is.
freaky. I didn't
Yeah,
realize it when I was writing
it's
it down.
spooky. That's how crazy the league has been. Like not only close games, they're all finishing like the exact same. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, in terms of why, I mean, obviously some of it's just kind of random, like schedule just kind of shook out, closely matched teams, whatever, it's just happening. But I also think going back to like the parity that we talked about, outside of maybe a few teams at the bottom, the same reason why the Aces, or not the reason, a reason why the Aces have like not as good of a record as they did before, like the middle of the league being a lot better, and I think because of that, like you're seeing more close games, especially as the season winds down and like the playoff implications become more clear and like more teams feel like they have a shot because more teams do have a shot this year. It's not just the Aces and the Liberty are gonna, it's one of them. It's there's a lot of teams feel like they have a realistic shot, and so the sense of urgency is sort of turning up for all of those teams, for the teams in the middle who feel like they can catch the teams at the top. And so you're seeing that play out in just these really close, exciting, high intensity games, which is setting up so perfectly as we turn into September in a few days and the end of the regular season going into the playoffs is going to be so hype.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into some of these games. We'll start with Mercury Dream. Obviously, we saw Atlanta grab that first win against the Mercury during the streak of games. They barely lost this time, 2 points. How do you kind of view this result between them? Does it speak more to like Atlanta starting to piece it together, or is it just like Phoenix being able to close out that close game?
Yeah, I think, like the result, like win or loss, close game kind of is what it is. But I do think it speaks more to Atlanta when you look at this game and the one before it, where these two teams played a back to back and Atlanta won the previous one by 9 and then lose this one by 2. So basically, Atlanta's right there in this back to back, both sets against the Mercury, who have kind of been that like next team up. I always talk about like that top 5, I feel like are championship contenders. And I feel like the Mercury all year have kind of been like that next team if there was going to be a sixth team, that middle of the pack team. And now, like, I think Atlanta has vaulted themselves up from where they were pre-Olympic break, which is outside of the playoffs looking in, bottom tier, to now like that middle of the pack tier, that next tier with the Mercury. They're right there, and they proved it for 80 minutes that they're right there with the Mercury. I think Fever as well is a team you could say that about, who definitely were like a bottom tier team in the first month and have vaulted themselves up. And now you have like Mercury, Fever, Dream are all like on that tier where they could beat anybody on any given night, and kind of that middle tier where they're all battling in that like 6, 7, 8, 9 range. So it's really fun to see. And I think that the Dream just kind of like solidified their status, and then they were basically right there with the Fever in the next game. But again, lost that game. But all of those teams are neck and neck in my mind.
It's like a fever dream right after Mercury being in
Oh,
retrograde.
oh,
I thought of
double
that one while you were
party.
talking.
Let's
Anyway,
go.
enough of my puns, but let's talk about the other game, Sun versus Sky. We'll talk more about Connecticut in a little bit because we do have another game from them that we want to talk about. But with the Sky on the other end of like two tough losses, the other one being about against the Aces that we talked about, what are we seeing that's like more positive from this team? Because these are some top teams in the league that they've lost by 2 points to. And so like we just talked about, the Mercury, the Dream, and the Fever being in that tier. Where did Chicago kind of land? Like, what do you take away from them in these couple of games?
Yeah, I think this has been just flat out perfect for them. And like this is in a way that like they could never say, but we can say here. Because
Yeah, yeah.
if you're like the Sky franchise, I don't think you actually want to make the playoffs because you are really, really setting yourself up right now for the future with obviously your young front court, Angel and Camilla. Like Kennedy has been great. Teaspoon obviously was the right hire as a head coach. So I think like you're only going up from here, and getting one more good pick. I think getting into the lottery one more time really just kind of cements that upward trajectory. But you obviously also want your team to be playing high level basketball and competing. And they did that in both of these games against like some of the top dogs in the league. They competed, they went basically toe to toe, and then they still lost, which is perfect. 2 point loss to the Sun, 2 point loss to the Aces. That tells you like the Sky are there, but they could still add another piece potentially if they continue to slide in the loss column and the Dream passed them up. So I don't think that week could have gone any better for the Chicago Sky from like a franchise standpoint. I love it for them, and I think it's just amazing for 2025.
Cal's just like, oh no, they lost by 2 points. How tragic. One last thing for me for this guy. I'm just happy to see Michaela Onyenwere in that starting spot. Now
Yes.
that Marina's gone, I think we first saw her flourish that first year in New York, being in a starting spot and being thrown into the fire every single night. Kind of a similar story to Jordan Horston with her first year with the Seattle Storm. They kind of have like similar trajectories in terms of like where they were their rookie year. So I'm just glad she's able to like be brought back into that spotlight a little bit. Has had a solid couple of games as well too. So yeah, just wanted to give a shout out to Mick because she's probably one of my favorite players in the league. All right, let's talk about the Connecticut Sun because yes, they beat the Sky by 2 points. But then they also beat the Liberty on August 24, 72-64. We talked about this matchup last week before they played and about how New York has had, Connecticut's number all season long. What does this win? They were able to get the win. What does this win say for them, especially with the playoffs, coming closer and just how tight this playoffs is going to be?
Yeah, obviously confidence wise, it's huge to be able to get a win over the Liberty because you're probably going to have to do that in the playoffs. To me, like I thought this whole time, like they go 0-3 in the first games against the Liberty. Like we know what the Suns defense is. They've been one of the best defensive teams in the league for years. Like this whole time, I was thinking like, all right, to get over that hump, like they're gonna have to also score the ball. Like they're not gonna beat the Liberty if they can't, match offensively. They go out and get Marina Mabry after losing 2 games to the Liberty in like 1 week. Marina Mabry, someone who can shoot, who can help them score. Obviously, like, all right, they're checking that box. And then instead, they beat the Liberty by only making 2 threes the entire game and just holding them to 64 points, which is tied for their lowest in the regular season in the super team era the last couple of years. And I got looking. The one time that Connecticut did beat New York last year in the playoffs, the one game was the one time they held them to less points than this, with 63s. So maybe the key has been defense the whole time. Maybe if the Sun can just double down on what they are best at and guard and defend the Liberty, then like that's the key to getting over the hump. But in terms of that end, like I really do wish I had a better answer for this, and I feel like I feel like our boy Mark Schindler probably does. He's always a lot smarter than I am with this stuff in terms of like the specific wrinkles. Like, what did they do this game that they didn't do last game? And I'm sure there's something. So, Mark, help us out if you know. But
Should
to
go
be
call him.
honest,
He's in the next room.
yeah, let him. Hey, Mark,
No,
we
no, no,
give me some insight.
no.
No, but I mean, to be honest, from my perspective, I kind of felt like the Liberty just missed a lot of open shots. Not that like the Sun weren't good at defense, because they're always good at defense. Like the Sun average game is a really, really good defensive game, and they did that again. But I didn't feel like they were actually like better than they usually are defensively. Just like the Liberty missed some open shots, which is like not, I don't think what you would want to hear as a Sun fan, because that's like not something you can necessarily just snap your fingers and replicate the way that if you
Yeah.
actually like had a different game plan, which maybe they did. But yeah, I don't see Sabrina shooting 2 for 12 from 3 on, an average night, things like that. And like some of those shots were contested, obviously, but they weren't all. Like some of them just didn't drop. So I don't know. Like I still think that the Liberty would be fine in a playoff series between these two teams. I think, maybe the Sun get it to 5 games. I don't think the Sun would actually come out of there, but the Sun thrive on people like us saying things like that and making it their whole marketing campaign, disrespect, CT, all that. So go ahead if you want. I do think obviously the Sun are like an incredible team. I just, this one game wasn't enough to convince me that they should be like favored in a matchup against New York, but it is really big for them like not getting swept in the season series.
Al's gonna have his voice clipped from this podcast saying the Sun love to use this in their marketing campaign, disrespect, and then you saying again, go ahead.
I think I've been on 2 of those already, so let's see if they can make it 3.
Yeah, why did they go after you? That's kind of wild.
I don't know.
Anyway, to be clear, we're not counting these teams out. It's just fair analysis based on the facts that have been presented and the games that have already happened. Let's go to another game, and that is on August 25th. The Wings beat the Sparks 113-10. And what was special about this game, I've got a couple of fun facts from Dallas Wings PR. Dallas erased a 22-point deficit. And it's like, here, let me look down here. It's like the third largest in franchise history that they've overcome, the most under the Dallas Wings banner, and the most since 2005. It's a season high, and they were 4 away from the franchise record of 117. It's also the most points scored by any WNBA team this season, and top 20 of all time, 16th place. So we got some fun little stats out of here. Both Arike and Natasha Howard, they each had 30, which they also broke another record, and that's what fun facts are for. They became just the second duo in franchise history to each score 30 in the same game, and the first since the 2014 season. There were a bunch of other stats as well, as JC Sheldon getting a career high in assists. So tons of fun stuff from Dallas to overcome LA like this, 22 points, win by 3. Let's look at this from both sides. How do you feel about this win if you're Dallas? And how do you feel about this loss if you're LA?
Yeah, a little bit of what I was talking about with the sky here. If you're LA, I think you feel great because you want Paige Beckers, and this helps you get there, especially that fourth quarter. Like sending Rakia to the bench, I think is a we want Paige Beckers move.
I wish you would have heard my laugh when I saw you type out it's great because they want Paige. I put like a little LOL on our show
I saw
document.
that. Like we were
Oh
in the
my
doc at
god.
the same time, which was hilarious because I typed that out in our notes. It like instantly I saw you type right next to it. So funny.
It was
But
hilarious.
it's true. I mean, like that team could be filthy if you like Paige and Rakia and Cam going forward. Like, come on, that's who's stopping that. But from the Wings perspective, this is almost like the anti-Sun. It's funny, like in order to like the Wings. I've talked about their defense on here before. I feel like I'm being like a huge hater in this episode, and I don't know why. It's like not the energy I'm going for, but we've talked about the Wings defense on this pod before, and it's hard to talk about the Wings defense without being a huge hater because outside of the COVID shortened 2020 season and the fever that year, the Wings have literally the worst defensive rating in the history of the WNBA. But like the Sun, all they had to do to get a win was double down on what they are good at, which is guarding. all the Wings had to do to get a win was just double down on what they're good at. They didn't actually have to guard. They allowed 110 points in regulation. They just scored 113. They scored whatever it was, like 80 points in the fourth quarter. Like this game was hilarious to me. But if you're Dallas, I think you feel great because you've had so many injuries this season coming off of what was an incredible year last year for the franchise, getting a top 4 seed, hosting a playoff series, winning a playoff series, and then Satu gets hurt, and then Maddie Siegrist is hurt, Natasha Howard's hurt for a while, and it's just like it's really tough to overcome all that. So obviously this season is sort of like a lost season from that perspective. Like they just had too many injuries to overcome. But now that everyone's finally healthy, like you do like to see some positive momentum for them and them starting to piece it all together, which is like what they got in that fourth quarter and also like what launched them momentum wise into that next game, that win over the Aces, which was a really positive thing for them. So I think if you're Dallas, you feel great about this as well.
Yeah, you could definitely tell they were thrilled to beat the Aces in that next game, just based on, if you watched the game and you saw the reactions after as well. But yeah, I loved your analysis of that game, Cal. I think that you're not a hater. You're completely fair, and I think that might have been some of the best analysis in our podcast yet. All right, we got one more close game before we move on to games to watch for this week, and that is happened on August 26th. The Mystics beat the Storm 74-72. 2-point victories seem to be the common thing here. I do want to bring up, and I kind of hinted at this earlier in the episode, Aaliyah Edwards. Remember I was talking about Asia's outfit? Well, she did the thing. She went out as soon as Asia tweeted wrinkled white tee for the win. Aaliyah was like, I'm going to buy one right away. She did, and the Mystics beat the Storm right after she wore that outfit. If you're on YouTube, you'll see the tweet that I pulled up. Aaliyah says there's something different about it. It's a certified game winner. And the Washington Mystics also shout out Asia as well. I have a feeling more players are going to show up in white t-shirts now and see if they can get the win. But did you have any takeaways from this Mystics Storm game? It turns out a healthy Brittany Sykes is a pretty damn good player and a pretty damn good thing. I don't know if you noticed that, Cal, but that's kind of my takeaway.
Yeah, how soon we forget, huh? She misses a couple months and everyone forgets how good she is on both sides of the ball. By the way, on the white tee thing, I want to say I love the white tee thing, and I'm very in on it because when I was either freshman or sophomore in high school, I'm trying to remember, we always had to dress up for basketball game days, like to school. And
Okay.
so one day, like I had like my white tee undershirt, and I was like eating breakfast. I didn't want to like spill anything on my nice shirt, and I was gonna put like a nice shirt over it and then go to school. And for some reason, like my idiot 15-year-old self forgot to put on like my nice shirt, so I just show up in like my white tee and like nice pants to school when everyone else is like actually dressed up, which was at first like very embarrassing, but then like it became like a thing. It became like a bit, and so I like everyone started calling me White Tee Wetzel, and I started wearing white tees like all the time. So the white tee thing that is sweeping the league right now,
It's
all on
because of
board
you.
for it.
It's because of you.
That's what
You
I'm
started the
trying to say.
movement.
That's what I'm trying to say.
That's incredible.
I
Wow.
I have not even thought about that in a long time, but this reminded me of it. The high school white tee days. So I had to get that story in there.
Do you have any
Um,
pictures from that day?
from that day, probably somewhere. I would have to go look. I'm sure I have pictures of me in white
That would
tees in high school
yeah,
somewhere.
that would instantly be the thumbnail of the episode. Just a picture of Cal in a white tee, a picture of Asia in her white tee, and a picture of Aaliyah in her white tee. Oh my goodness. I love that story so much. But yeah, any takeaways from the game
Yeah,
aside from the
anyway,
white
how about
tee?
basketball, huh? I almost forgot about
Yeah.
basketball. Yeah, I think this game is, I mean, you could talk about Brittany Sykes and the Mystics, but to me, this game is like a big deal for the Storm because if you saw Skylar Diggins-Smith press conference afterwards, like she was not happy with herself. Like she was the one who fouled at the end of the game and for those game-winning free throws when it was tied. And I think like that. I feel like that may have unlocked a beast a little bit. Like we'll see tonight that it's their next game. By the time you're listening to this, who knows what will happen in that game? But I feel like that's like they got some motivation. Like they lit a fire going forward And then just, aside from that aspect, like Gabby Williams, first game with the Storm, obviously, like it's gonna take a little bit of time, I think, to kind of sort of integrate her like back into this offense, which we saw. But we also talked about
Jet
last
lag
week.
probably too.
Yeah, exactly,
Ugh.
exactly. So she's gonna look better in terms of scoring at some point, but she also, like we talked about last week, like doesn't really need to have like a huge impact on this game, which I think she did. Like she fits whether she's scoring or not, and what she was able to do. I think like defensively, I was really impressed with her defensively right away. And I like they brought her off the bench, which I think was interesting and really cool for Jordan Horston. I don't know if that'll be the look all the rest of the year or not, but either way, like I think that's positive signs going forward. And yeah, looking forward to how Gabby sort of like develops back into her old team.
Yeah, and a lot of these teams that we just talked about in these close games as they continue to play will be in action this week. So let's get to our games to watch for this weekend. On Friday, August 3rd, there's actually surprisingly no Thursday games this week. Usually there's one on Prime every week, but this week there aren't. Like you said, big Wednesday slate. By the time you're listening to this, those games will have been over. But on Friday, we got Fridays on Ion or League Pass if you don't have Ion. We've got Fever versus Sky at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, as well as Lynx versus Wings at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, then followed by a two-game 10 p.m. ET slate, Dream versus Aces, Liberty versus Storm. All four of these matchups intrigue me greatly because I feel like it's going to continue to follow the theme of very close games. Then on Saturday, we have one matchup, Sun versus Mystics, 3 p.m. Eastern on League Pass. Sunday, we got a lot of games, 5 games. Storm versus Sun starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, followed by Sky versus Lynx at 3. Fever versus Wings, as well as Aces versus Mercury at 4 p.m. Eastern. And then the last game of the day will be Dream versus Sparks, 7 p.m. Eastern. And all those games will be on League Pass. I know that's a lot of games, but Cal, do you have any matchups in particular that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, a couple. We talked at the top about like the Aces and defending some of those teams of the space, and I think the Mercury Aces versus Mercury is going to be a great game to kind of get a good feel for that, and if the Aces can tweak some things and figure that out, because like I said, like the Mercury have had some very good offensive games against the Aces this year. And then the other one I'm looking at is Storm versus Sun. I think just two like elite defensive front courts going at it, and again, like watching how Gabby developed, that'll be her third game. It look fourth game. She's only played one, but by then she will have played two more, so that'll be her fourth game back, which is definitely enough time to sort of like integrate and kind of see how that's going to look. So, but also the front courts again, two defensive front courts that are some of the best in the league, and that is as an appreciator of defense, like I'm very excited to watch.
Yeah, so a lot of really good matchups the rest of this weekend, heading into September, which is kind of wild to think about. Summer is just about over. We're getting into the fall season, and that means playoff season is just around the corner as well. So make sure you tune into all these games. Make sure you're following Her Hoop Stats on social media, as well as subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts so that you can catch Coast to Coast every week. We've got Her Hoop Stats maybe has some new podcasts coming down the line too, so stay tuned for that. Just gonna throw that little teaser in. Our coverage is ramping up. It's ramping up towards the end of the season as well as into the college season, of course, because we have all things women's basketball. You can follow myself at Crina MM, Calvin at C Wetzel 31, and we will see you next week.